Talk about what the performance result has been out of that.
Well, the performance has been good, and as you know, this is important stuff because people who have spent their lives serving the community as teachers, as police officers, firefighters, they deserve retirement security. No one in Rhode Island should have to retire into poverty. And so we need to get this system healthy. It's been about a year since we launched our Back to Basics investment plan to help get the system healthy faster, and it's working. Over the last year, we've earned almost $1 billion of investment gains. We've had a double-digit return. The implementation of Back to Basics is still underway. This is a multi-year process to get there. But as you mentioned, we've moved over $500 million away from some of the higher cost investments that we were in, the hedge funds, toward more traditional investments, and the performance has been good.
And certainly, I think we all know, God, we've written on it probably 200 times, and Ted Seidel's been, the attack dog on the issue of hedge fund fees, and just diminishing those costs out of the system, I think, has helped in the performance as well.
That's definitely a part of it.
Yeah.
By moving toward more passive strategies, we're saving millions of dollars on fees. But it's not just about the fees, it's also about the performance,
right.
And the performance has been good.
Right, and listen, I'm not a very smart guy, but when Warren Buffett says that hedge funds are not a great idea, I'm going with Warren Buffett.
Well, I'm just doing what I think is right for Rhode Island.
Yeah.
We went through a very in-depth process last year. It involved a lot of experts, both local and national. That's how we came up with this plan. So now we're executing on it, and the results have been good. And it's good not only for the people who are in the system, who know that they can retire with confidence, but also the taxpayers who fund it to have a sustainable pension system as well.
Bloomberg came out with a report around July. I don't know if it got a lot of play here. Bloomberg wrote a big piece about it, about that Rhode Island's unfunded liability is about where it was prior to pension reform. Part of that, I think, was because the cost of fees and some of the underperformance of hedge funds. How do we get that to that next level?
Well, the biggest thing, though, is that since pension reform, we've also adopted more realistic assumptions around pension
performance.
Yeah, so the whole pension crisis, both in the state of Rhode Island and nationally, a lot of it is because states were using very high return assumptions, which made their systems look healthier than they actually were.
Right.
And there was some, I won't say dishonest, but at least overly optimistic accounting that was going on for a very long time. So, we went from having an 8.25% assumed rate of return in Rhode Island, which was, I think everybody thinks, way too high, not realistic. That was lowered to 7.5, and then this past year we lowered it from 7.5 to 7. When you lower those assumed rates of return, it may make it look like your liability is
right.
going up, but you're really just presenting a more accurate picture.
Right.
So
kudos
I
on
think that was part of it.
Yeah, we've been writing a lot about the issues related to, and I understand that it's not a state fund or state guaranteed or state insured, but the performance over and now receivership at St. Joseph's Pension Fund. Are you keeping an eye on what's going on there?
Yes.
If you had an opportunity to talk to the receiver,
yes,
Steve Del Sesto?
Yeah, I've met with Steve Del Sesto a couple of weeks ago. This is a tragedy, and frankly, it's an outrage. There needs to be a thorough investigation of how this happened, who's responsible, and there needs to be some sort of accountability. So I've told the receiver, and I've also told Max Wistow, who's involved in the process as well, that if there's anything my office can do to be helpful, we are ready, willing, and able, because the folks who are in this system deserve better.
So a couple points I just want to raise, and I think it's been a shock. I talk to Max Wistow on a regular basis about that, and I think probably more than 45 days ago, neither one of us knew much about what's called a church fund, and no one looks at these church funds. There's no regulatory authority over them. There's not just the St. Joseph's Pension Fund, but there's other dioceses and other religious organizations have these church funds. Clearly the diocese does. Is there a way to intervene? Is it just separation of church and state? What's the solution to that? Because if you've had any interaction, and I have, with some of the retirees at the St. Joseph, it's cataclysmic. I mean, it's as sad a situation as I've ever seen in Rhode Island.
No, you're right, and I do think there needs to be more oversight of these plans. And there needs to be more oversight of the health of pension systems generally when hospital conversions take place, but then more broadly, as you say, these church plans. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at and that I've been talking with some of the legislative
Should the
leadership
general
about
treasurer have a role in the hospital conversion, specifically on looking at the aspect of the condition and the performance of the pension fund? And one of the things that's been interesting is the fiduciary responsibility of the assets falls under the Attorney General under the existing statute. And, we'll find out what his role was and what his performance was. But his most recent statements have been, well, that's not really my job.
Yeah.
Does there need to be somebody to have that job? And is that an appropriate role for you to at least add the expertise?
Yeah, there does need to be somebody. There does need to be somebody when you have these hospital conversions who can look at these pension plans and offer an expert opinion as to whether the plan for those pensions is viable or not. So we'll talk with legislators, we'll talk with others who are involved in the St. Joseph situation and figure out, does it make sense for that to be the treasurer in the future? Does it make sense for it to be someone else? But you're right that there definitely needs to be somebody with real expertise that is involved in the process.
Another question on that point is, I think there's been a statement by the governor that the state doesn't have any role. It seems a disappointment that we can't assist in this. It's the largest pension fund collapse that at least anybody can identify. You're talking about people of incredibly low means who performed for decades in service to their hospital, and in many cases, if you talk to them, they thought they were doing the church's work. They took a lesser salary to work at St. Joe's than they could have made ever at, gone over to Rhode Island Hospital and made twice as much. Can't we do better on a situation like that?
Yeah, let's start, though, with a better understanding of how this happened and who's at fault. Because there is a legal process that's going to need to play out. And if there are parties that acted irresponsibly, they should step up and play a role in helping to make these folks whole. I think we're still early in the process as a state of figuring out what happened, who's at fault, what the potential remedies might be. But as I mentioned earlier, I've said to the receiver and I've said to others who are involved that if our office can be helpful in the process, I want to be helpful.
Let's jump over to a more happy note. You are de facto Santa Claus with unclaimed properties, and you have massive piles of money stacked in your office. Is that where it is? Is the unclaimed?
I won't disclose where it is.
Where the location of the is it billions of dollars?
300 million.
$300 million.
Yeah. And this is basically a statewide lost and found system.
Yeah.
If you are owed money and the person who owes it to you doesn't know how to find you, they are required by law to turn it over to us so that we can reunite that money with the rightful owner. $300 million, more than 200,000 Rhode Islanders, we believe, are in our system, and we need to get the word out. So go to our website, go to treasury.ri.gov. You can search yourself, search your family members, and see
I want to personally
match.
thank you because about 2 years ago, I want to say I collected around $400, which would be above the average, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And you personally, I think, were involved. There was emails from your offices, so I want to personally thank you for that $400.
Everybody who I talk to about unclaimed property says, "Oh, that's great, but that's not me. I know I don't have it."
Oh no, it's
You
like
would be
4
shocked.
different accounts.
Now, when I started, I didn't have any when I started this job, but my brother did, my father did. You check. Go treasury.ri.gov.
And it is the Seth Magaziner lottery to Rhode Island.
Well, no, it's just my job to reunite people with their money.
Take full credit for it. You're going to get blamed for things you
Yeah.
didn't do. Take full credit for this one. Talk a little bit about, let's jump back to the more complicated fiscal issues of the state of Rhode Island. We've got a deficit problem already. This is about as a good economy as one can get. Stock market soaring, which is helping you on the performance of the pension fund. Unemployment's at, Gary Sass is on every Monday with us, and he says, listen, we've got to change things. We've got a module that's just not right for how where we're generating our revenue and where we're going with our expenditures.
So I'll say a couple things. The first is we have done some really good things in recent years to help save money on the expense side. Pension reform is saving hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Medicaid reform, $100 million a year. There's an announcement today that there's going to be a round of buyouts for higher cost state employees. That's, I think, a good move that will save millions of dollars. But as you know from being at this for a while, in the political process, as soon as you save some money, there are 5 times as many ideas for how to go and spend it, either in the form of spending or tax cuts. And we have made the decision in Rhode Island to cut taxes several times in different ways. And I'm not saying that's bad, but that's the challenge. The challenge is I think there's been some really good work done on the cost-saving side in Rhode Island in recent years. But, there's also been obviously that pull, in the State House, as soon as you find a little money, you want to go and use it. And that's, I think, a habit that we need to be careful of. So, we'll see what happens. I think we've got a very tough job to do as a state in the coming years to close this structural deficit. And, again, I say to the governor, the General Assembly leadership all the time, if I can be helpful, I'm ready and willing.
And then let's just jump to the last one, and then Evan England just had his second child, and as a father who just had one graduate from Georgetown, I've got one up at Colby. These 4-year colleges seem to be on the expensive side.
Yeah.
The $400 you gave me from that lost assets did not cover a lot at Georgetown. You've got some programs. How do we do better on funding, helping families fund their higher education? The governor's 100% correct talking about, listen, we're in an economy where you've got to compete. You've got to have tools. You've got to have a college education in many cases to be able to
and
prosper.
We shouldn't have a situation where you have kids who are talented, who are making good grades, who have the work ethic, and aren't able to go to college just because their parents can't afford it.
Right.
So this is a national problem. It's, I think, going to be one of the defining challenges of the millennial generation for years to come. One thing that you can do is start saving early the best you can. So through the College Bound Saver program, which our office manages, you can start a college savings account for as little as $50 or less in some cases, and you can get a little tax break for putting money into a college bound account. You can invest it and it grows over time. There's no federal capital gains tax on the investment earnings, so it's a nice tax efficient way to save for college. And that's one way that we're trying to help.
And you can set how aggressive you want that fund to be invested.
Exactly. It's very much like a 401k or an IRA. There's a menu of options for how you want to invest, except instead of spending that money on retirement, you can spend it on tuition, books, room and board. And Rhode Island actually has one of the oldest and most successful college savings plans of this type in the country. We did a big overhaul of it about a year ago.
Right.
We now have some of the lowest fees of any college savings plan in the country. We've had very good performance, a high Morningstar rating, so it's a really good product, and we encourage people to check it out.
And grandparents can make donations?
Grandparents.
Can bosses make donations?
Well, I'm sure your employees back here are listening.
Well, I'm checking in on it for Evan.
Yeah,
Evan had texted me earlier today. He said, listen, Seth hasn't really pushed this quite as aggressively, so I'm just doing a little bidding
take a look
for
at
Evan.
Yeah, take a look.
Right.
But no, but there is a gifting feature on the site, and so College Bound Saver, we encourage everyone to check it out.
Great. Last thing, I don't know that we've left the 2016 election cycle.
Mm-hmm.
We are certainly already in the 2018 election cycle. Peter Nerona's announced that he's running. Bobby Nardolillo was over here yesterday. He's running for United States Senate. Flanders is expected to run. Everybody and their brother is running for governor, and not a lot of names running for general treasurer. So you must be doing something pretty good. The governor's certainly attracting a lot of sniper fire from a range of areas. What do you see in this next less than 18 months?
I'm a terrible political pundit. That's not what I do. What I'm focused on is doing my job. I was elected to do a job, and I'm doing it the best I can, and that'll be my focus. When it comes time for campaign season, I expect to run for re-election and work very hard at it. But right now, I'm really just focused on doing the job.
We've tapped John Della Volpe to be our partner in polling, one of the best pollsters in America and tops probably in the world on millennials. So we'll be able to provide you with some good free directional information. But we really invest in this. We think it's critically important that Rhode Islanders just get some directional information about where Rhode Islanders are going and what they're feeling about. Do you see this? It's amazing. I've never seen it in my career of, almost record employment or record employment, stock market flying, et cetera, but there seems to still be a malaise. And part of it may be Trump and Congress, but part of it's here too. How do we shatter that?
Well, I think in Rhode Island and nationally, we've had a recovery, but it hasn't been a recovery shared by all. And you're right, the stock market's been great, and that's good for the pension fund, and it's good for a lot of people, but half of the country doesn't own any stocks.
Yeah, right.
And so I think one of the challenges that we have, those of us who are serving in government, is how do we expand this recovery so that working families really feel it? And that's why we launched our Bank Local program, where we are helping small businesses get access to capital by
Right.
moving cash to local banks and credit unions, for example. I think we all need to be doing more in government to make sure that the recovery is really shared by all. Because if that's not the case, then people get very frustrated, and you get things like the President Trump, which, at least in my view, is not a positive.
You are not a Trump voter.
Well, I am not a Trump voter, no.
Listen, I want to thank you for taking the time and coming on. I think it's really helpful. I think one of the great things about this environment is people get to come on and tell what's going on, for the most part uninterrupted, maybe a little prodding to help out for Evan England and his newborn child. But thanks so much for coming on. Have a great Columbus